I know a lot of people think it's crazy, and tell people in my story that just through God's help and grace, He's given me the ability to forgive all of these people, and I had to do that. I'm just speaking from my personal experience. I'm not telling anybody else what they need to do, but I heard one time that unforgiveness is a poison you drank thinking it's going to poison the other person. I really think in I know personal experience, unforgiveness was really killing me and tearing
Yeah.
me up. And I had to do that. I had to forgive in order to be able to move on.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of American Snippets. I'm your co-host, Barb Allen. Very excited to be sitting down today with Kim Lewallen, who is not only an Olympic athlete, an American record holder, a national champion, but she is just a kind, sweet human being. And her story goes well beyond, not only does she have the story and insight to share about what it takes to train and discipline and grow and compete at that such high extreme level. She has a story of resilience beyond that as well. A story that took her decades to tell, a story that pushed her perhaps even beyond the capacity that she even thought she had, and took certainly as much endurance as those professional sports did to overcome and get through, and how she is using the culmination of all of those experiences, good and bad, for a greater good now is truly extraordinary. So I want you listening here to take a moment, really set aside what you're doing, listen to the story, listen to the message Kim has, because if you are pushing to reach a goal and struggling to achieve it, she's got a message for you. If you are struggling with something from the past or from the present moment right now that you are so overwhelmed with and don't have a clue how to get through, how to find help, how to find support for, Kim has that answer for you. So sit back, listen in, and a big thank you to Kim for taking time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Barb. It's an honor to be here.
Yay. So let's get started first. We'll go, into the fun stuff. Talk for a minute. I want to start here at this moment. Talk here for a second about what does it feel like to walk into an arena for the opening ceremony of the Olympics as an athlete on the Olympic team. How old were you at that moment?
I was
18?
18 years
18 years
old.
old. Yeah. So it's being 18-year-old as an Olympic athlete walking into that arena for the opening ceremony. What does that feel like?
Oh, my goodness. My Olympic dream started when I was 10 years old, and I was actually a part of a swim team in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we were very, very blessed to have amazing swimmers from that team. And in 1976, I was watching the Olympics, and we had several swimmers from our swim team, the Cincinnati Marlin team, that were competing. And so that's where my dream started. So from the time I was 10 until I was, in 1980, I tried out when I was 14 years old, and I missed it by 4/100ths of a second.
Yeah.
And so from there on, that's the training. I'm giving you a little bit of a background because when I finally made the team, and 8 years after my dream started, they because we were the host team, the Olympics I was in Los Angeles. So
Yeah.
you have the hometown advantage, you have the crowd pumped, and so we were outside the stadium, and they keep the host team until the last team.
Right.
And so we're outside, we hear the crowd getting fired up, right? And we're going through this tunnel. We start going through this tunnel, and as we heard this USA, USA. And as we got closer to the opening, when we came into the stadium, it was just this erupting of USA, and everybody's waving their flags and cheering. it was just that dream of that little 10-year-old had and finally achieving it and being in our home country too. I mean, people said, weren't you bummed that you didn't get to go to another country? And I was like, no, because we had the hometown advantage. I didn't have to eat different food, things like that. So it was just the most exciting moment. And we marched around. It was just, if that wasn't awesome enough, when we stopped on this, where we were in the stadium, the U.S. team stopped right where my parents were sitting. And my friend Bruce Hayes, who was one of my best friends back then, he was like, Kim, wouldn't it be weird if we saw your parents? And all of a sudden, I'm not kidding, right after he said that, he said, Kim, they're your parents. And I mean, I was just crying and they're running down down the steps. And it was just incredible.
That's awesome. Awesome. So you were 18 years old. And as you mentioned there, that was a long path to get to those Olympics. Your family, you have 7 siblings.
Yeah. We were all swimmers.
You all swim. Has anybody else taken it as far as you have in terms of?
All of my siblings were either national or junior national level swimmers, and
that's insane.
Yeah, and I have 2 brothers. The 2 brothers who are the next. So I'm number 7. So number 6 and number 5 and 6. Yeah. We'd all trained together, and all 3 of us went to the Olympic trials in 1980, and
oh my gosh.
Just missed it. And then in 1984, one of the hardest things for me was, even though I was excited I made it, my other 2 brothers just missed it. And you have, in the United States, you have that day.
Yeah.
In other countries, they select teams based on your performance, right, for that year. But the United States, they do a trials, and either you're on or you're not. You have that day. And so that's frustrating for some, because every once in a while you might be off a little bit. And so it was really tough seeing them not make it, but they were incredibly supportive, and I have an amazing family.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember 16 years old when I took my driving test on a completely lower level. I have a twin brother, and we rolled up to this driving test at the same time, and he took the test first, but this awful, unhappy woman who just screamed at him the whole time. So I'm standing there, he gets back, he gets out of the car, his face is white, and she's still just ranting on, saying nasty things about his driving, and he failed. She throws the paper. And then it's like, okay, now you get in the car, Barbie, right? And so,
oh, great.
So I passed and I got my license, but I felt like bad and guilty for it, because it was a happy day for me on a totally different level, right? A totally different level. But I understand.
Hey, it's all relative.
I understand the tie to the siblings and how it's hard to celebrate something when you care about, is upset and doesn't. And certainly that's happened. I think that happens in life throughout, right? Like, how do people deal with it when you all have goals and you're all looking for something and one person excels? And you've probably seen it happen. People you were close to hit some mark when you fell short. And I know actually throughout the course of your life and experience that has happened. So it's part of life. Yeah, I'll roll with it, right? So from the time you were 14 and started competing, you racked up 5 times national championship levels. Mm-hmm. You had 2 silvers at the World Championships, a bronze and gold at the Pan American Games. You placed 8th in the Olympics, and that's the year, obviously, a big year for a lot of reasons. We'll go into. You're a 3-time NCAA champion, a bronze and gold at the World University Games, for which you were the United States team captain. I mean, please. And that is from the age of 14 to like 18, right? Or 19. Like, this is in the span of the years when a lot of girls are going through, or you are going through, adolescence, and a lot of girls are caught in high school and the drama and turmoil and all that. And so for a teenager to go to that level, talk about the discipline. I mean, maybe because your family did this as a unit, it was just sort of natural for you, like what you did, right? But it's not a super common thing for anybody at any stage of life to have that level of determination and discipline. So how did you all get that? Did you help each other? Did you root each other on?
Oh man, like I said, my family was just remarkable, really remarkable. My parents were just trying to find a sport to keep us all out of trouble, right? So they put my oldest brother in the sport, and then we just followed suit. And we did other things, but we usually came back to the swimming. And I started actually swimming when I was about 5, and I wasn't a very good swimmer when I started. Actually, when I tried out for the Cincinnati Marlins, they went to my mom and they said, well, Mrs. Rhodenbaugh, we're sorry, she's not quite ready for this team at this point. And my mom, you have to know my mom, she kind of looked at him. She said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I think we'll probably have to take the rest of the kids off the team. And at the time, there were 6 of them, 6 of us. And I have to probably take them off and go to this other team because I can't do 2 different teams. And I know they'll take her over there. So, and of course, she knew what they were going to say, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Mrs. Rhodenbaugh, we'll let her on the team. And then, so not very glamorous start. And I actually was disqualified for about 2 years in the stroke that I went to the Olympics in, which was breaststroke. And I just kept, I was fast and I'd touch the wall and I'd be first, but then they'd say you're disqualified.
For what purpose?
My kick, just one of my feet, it wasn't going out, so I was doing something what they call a scissor kick, and so you get disqualified for that. I guess they think it's an advantage. So I didn't start off doing very well. I was fast, but I had to learn how to do it properly. And I just had a really strong work ethic. My parents are such hard workers. My dad was a doctor and worked all day and would come, done with work and have to go up to the pool. He was president of our team. I don't know how many times, and he would come and work the meets. My mom would work the meets. So she'd take us to practice. I was brought up in a very dedicated, very loving, very supportive family. So I was very blessed to have that. And so that really gave me, I think, that being modeled in the home was so important. And, my dad, they never put the pressure on us. They just said, whatever you do, just do your very best. And I've taken that with me wherever I go. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, just do my very best. And so just very simple, but,
yeah.
I was just a very hard worker. I was very coachable. I did everything I could do. And especially when when I was 10 and I had that dream, that's when I just became hyper focused and I was doing everything I could do, training 6 hours a day sometimes, right, to achieve that goal. And so I was very goal oriented. I set goals. We had great coaches at the Cincinnati Marlins that helped us to set those goals and kind of have those steps in order to achieve each level that year, and then the long range goals. And so, learned a lot of valuable lessons at a young age.
Yeah, I'd say. What does that mean to be very coachable?
I listened. I did what they told me to do. I became a coach later and I was really frustrated. I think there were a lot of kids. There were some kids that were wonderful. But it just, things have changed. I think that back then, and it was probably the family that I was in. I was taught to respect authority. And that was very important. And I listened. I did what they told me to do. I worked hard. Now that doesn't mean I didn't every once in a while, especially when I was kicking freestyle, I wasn't very good at that. I'd cheat sometimes and kick breaststroke to catch up. So I wasn't perfect, but I just was coachable. I listened and I did what they told me to do.
What is your advice for someone now who is on a team or being coached and frustrated and not getting the results or frustrated with their coach? What would you say to them?
Well, I think it's important it depends, right, on the situation. Yeah. Hopefully they have a good coach and know what they're doing. So, but, just if they have a good coach and they're just frustrated, just to trust in the process and believe in themselves and to not have any regrets. Not have any regrets. Just do everything you can to to train and to set those goals, to do everything you can, and so you don't look back and have regrets, and then just trust in that. And sometimes it's a process, right? So some years are better than others, and for instance, when I first started, I started as getting disqualified for 2 years, and I just it taught me something though. As a young kid, that taught me to keep going and keep fighting, and it worked out in the end. So, when I coached kids, a lot of kids, it's the self talk here. I think we've got to take. The Bible says to take captive every thought unto the obedience of Christ, and I think this is our battleground up here. And so I would have a lot of kids saying, "I'm too short. I'm this. I'm that," and I would always. That I'm too short, I would tell them, let me tell you about Ricardo Prado. And Ricardo Prado was this short, stocky, 400 individual medley world record holder from Brazil. He didn't look like a swimmer. He didn't look like what you would picture, but he was incredible. And so I think we've got to get outside of this and do everything we can to tell ourselves give ourselves positive messages. So
that mindset is something that you didn't necessarily always have for a lot of years, right? You had, and that
right.
is a good time to go into this. We're gonna go down a little bit into the deeper challenges, and then we'll come back up and the lessons learned from it. But that what you're just talking about is something that you learned after years of struggling. Talk about the challenge when you walked into the Olympics and you placed 8th that year. Some people may have been watching and been like, oh, what's wrong? She didn't do anything. But for me, once you know the backstory and you understand what exactly, I don't even know how you walked into that arena, given the condition you were in mentally, emotionally, physically at the time. So talk about what people didn't see beyond the smile and beyond the 8th place.
Right. So, on the outside, I looked like I had it all together. I was a master at putting on the mask. And I was so afraid of people knowing what was on the inside. And what was on the inside was sexual abuse that I had gone through. The first actually time I got sexually abused was when I was 6 years old by a teenager in the neighborhood who liked to play doctor on me. And then the next time I was sexually abused was when I was 14 years old. It was right after the Olympic trials in 1980. And I was on my very first national team representing the United States. And we went to an international meet in Hawaii, and we were staying at the University of Hawaii. And I was just taking a nap in my dorm room, and I woke up to one of the older swimmers sexually assaulting me. And that was one of 3 swimmers that ended up sexually assaulting me. And I think because the first thing that happened to me, I was so young. I just kind of disassociated, I think, a lot of what happened to me. I had so much shame. I didn't really know how to quite deal with it. And so parts of me would shut down. Of course, it affects a child's brain in so many ways. But for me, my parents would say, why didn't you tell us? And I can't answer that question other than I just couldn't. I just was so, part of me didn't understand what was going on because, when you're a 6-year-old, you don't know what's going on, but it does create this very unsafe feeling that stayed with me for years. I lived in fear. A lot of times I didn't know why, but after that happened in 1980, I just kind of went on and I just kind of kept going and I put everything into my sport. But the one that's really confident,
Yeah, on the same team
Yeah.
as the teammates, as the boys really who assaulted you. And they're supposed to
Right.
be
Well,
teammates.
right, right. And the next thing that happened to me, I was at the World Championships in 1982, representing the United States again. So, of course, my parents are trusting that I'm going to be safe, right? And I'm on this United States team, and
The best of the
that was the
best. Yeah.
yeah, and that was the meat of my life. I ended up getting 2 silver medals next to Uta Gweniger, who was a steroid machine from East Germany back when there was East and West, right?
Yeah.
And actually, years later, they were going to strip them of their medals and award us the gold. I'm like, well, that's not going to really do anything.
Right.
It was taken away back then. But anyway, so I had just gotten 2 silver medals, and we were all in one of the other. We all would stay at these. We stayed in this. That I think we were staying in a hotel, and we're just staying on this. The boys and the girls, the guys and the girls are all on the same floor. And I don't know where the team managers were. They weren't around. They weren't doing their job, I guess. I mean, I don't want to diss them, but
Right.
I think, we shouldn't have been doing either. We were in somebody's room and we were drinking.
Right.
And all of a sudden, everybody else was gone. And I was just with this other swimmer. And, this was these guys are everybody looked up to. They're great guys, great swimmers. And before I knew it, things started getting out of hand. And I told him to stop, and he didn't. And I was raped by the swimmer. And I was a virgin at the time. So,
oh, man.
That was stripped away from me. And I was, I know I was saying no, but then at some point I just froze. Of course, that's a lot of people freeze. Either they flee, or they fight, or they freeze. And at that point, I did say no, and then I just kind of froze. I couldn't believe it. And then I was 17. So each time these things happen, Barb, I started getting more and more out of control in my mind and my thoughts. I was still training 6 hours a day and training as hard as I could, doing everything I could do. But I started drinking. I wanted to escape. My drinking actually started when I was about 12, believe it or not.
Wow.
We lived in Cincinnati. No offense to my Catholic friends, good Catholic folks, they like to drink. And so everybody thought we were Catholic. Because we had 8 kids, and my dad would just say, no, we're just passionate Presbyterians. So anyway, but that drinking started early, and I learned that I liked it because I could escape, right? And so after each of these things happened to me, I would just escape even more. And then the worst thing that happened to me, even above the rape, was it was Olympic year. Here was the year that I've been waiting for. It was my senior in high school. And I was on a bus trip going to a swim meet, and it was dark. It was at night. People were sleeping. And I was sitting next to like a brother figure. This is somebody that I had known since I was a little girl. And I woke up to him with his hands in my pants, and he was sexually assaulting me. And I tried to get his hand out. He wouldn't even take it out. I mean, I literally, and I couldn't believe it. And when that happened, and that was one of 2 things that he tried that year, my trust, any trust that I had left was gone.
Yeah.
It was gone. And any kind of confidence I had was stripped. I mean, so much when people are sexually abused, it just strips them of their dignity, their confidence. It leads to so many things: substance abuse. It can lead to crime. It can lead to eating disorders, which something that happened that year. I started an eating disorder that year.
Yeah.
So that was my Olympic year. And I was trying to be a happy senior in high school, going to homecoming and going to prom and trying to train and doing all this stuff. And on the inside, I was dying, dying. Literally, I was dying. I was either not eating at school, or I would eat what my mom would make and I would throw it up. So I had a combination of anorexia and bulimia on top of training 6 hours a day. And so the fact that later that year and having to see my abuser every day,
Yeah.
twice a day, the fact that I ended up making the Olympic team, there's no reason I should have made it. I've told people I believe God allowed me to make that for a much bigger purpose. I wouldn't be sitting here with you today sharing my story. I don't believe, unless if I wasn't an Olympian. That's given me a platform to be able to speak. It was so much more than that 10-year-old's dream.
Yeah.
It was about giving hope and sharing the hope that I now have. It took a long time to get here, but I really have seen how God has always used that. Even before I got well, he used that to be able to motivate kids. And even though I may not have had it necessarily in me, God still used it. And so, anyway.
Do you know if any other female swimmers on your team at the same time you were? I mean, were you the one that they targeted, to your knowledge, or do you know, was this like rampant among the team? Not that it matters for you individually, but just.
I don't know. This was what, back in 1983 when this happened on my swim team, and then 1980 and 1982. And so I'm just now talking about it. I don't know who else they might have assaulted.
It's crazy to think about, right?
I know.
It's crazy to think you could all be sitting next to each other, carrying this enormous burden,
right,
and afraid to speak.
Right.
So now what you're doing is trying to get this message out in the thoughts, thinking that maybe there are other athletes experiencing the same thing. And certainly this isn't, exclusively for athletes. There are a lot of people, but your particular experiences with athletes and the high pressure and somebody you're on the same team with, and you have to face and deal with. And so now you're coming out with what happened to you now that you've reached a very hard-earned place of healing and faith and a new life and a new perspective on things. And so now you're using it to send this message out and share your story so people can understand that, hey, if this is happening to me or has happened to me, here's some help for you, and here's an example of how to get through it. So do you know, you recently shared your story on one other platform, and I've had a huge response from that. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I kind of give you a little bit of a background. About a year ago, I felt led to finally share my story. And I reached out to Nancy Hogshead-Makar, who I mentioned in my article. And she was on the 1984 Olympic team with me, and she's just amazing. She became a civil rights attorney, and she has her own story of abuse, and it's public, so she doesn't mind me.
Right.
She was actually raped at Duke University, but fortunately she was able to tell. That's huge, right?
Yes.
Because when we tell, the healing begins. It's when we're silent and things stay in the darkness that all of these things fester. And I'll get to that in a second. But she was able to get help, and she, after school, became a civil rights attorney. And I had followed her, and I was just so impressed with everything that she's done. And she started representing athletes, and she was really frustrated at what was going on in the Olympic Committee movement. Basically, the Olympic Committee was just saying it wasn't their job to represent or take care of these athletes. It was the parents or the swim team or the police. And so she started writing this. She was a part of writing the original draft of Safe Sport, which became a legislation just in 2018. She started writing that in like 2000, I think 12. And she had represented, just in the sport alone at that point, 14 swimmers who had been sexually abused, and nothing was happening.
Wow.
Nothing was happening in United States swimming, the Olympic Committee. Nobody was doing anything about it. People weren't losing their jobs, and so anyway, it was just really frustrating. Well, then, as a lot of people know, the gymnasts came out with their story about Dr. Nasser, who had sexually abused, and it's what was needed.
Yeah.
All these voices came forward, and it's really what was needed in order for Congress to wake up and go, wow, we need to do something about this. So they started a safe sport. There's actually a legislative act that did make the Olympic Committee responsible, and among other things. So I've been following Nancy, and I prayed about it, and God just kept saying, you need to share your story with Nancy. And the thing that was really motivating me was I was reading all these articles about the gymnasts who were
Yeah.
abused by the doctor, and people who are being swimmers or other athletes who are being abused by their coaches, but not a lot of athlete on athlete. And so I just felt a burden to share my voice to, hopefully, help others, to give them their voice. And so, it's like when we tell our story, it gives other people permission, right, to
Mm-hmm.
tell theirs. So, I was just being silent. I prayed about it. And when I talked to Nancy, she said, you need to share your story. And so it took a little while. I still had to go through. I shared a little bit with somebody who was really close to me. That allowed her to be able to come out and share her story and begin a healing process. That was even before I wrote the article. I started seeing the fruit, right, already of what I believe God was going to do with this. And so it took a little while. I had to go through a little bit more ministry and healing. And then it was like last summer, God was like, okay, it's time. And so I sat down. I hadn't written anything since I was in college. So it was definitely also part of my healing, and the response has been crazy. I met you, Barb,
Yeah.
because I just happened to sit a year ago next
Yeah.
to Marie Cosgrove on a plane going back to Cincinnati. And as I told you guys, my husband says there's no word in the Hebrew language for coincidence.
Uh-huh.
And, I sat next to Marie a year ago. She shared her story. I shared mine. We stayed in touch. A year later, Marie invites me to come to her greater event, McAllen,
Yeah.
Texas, and invites my husband, Nolan, and I to come to the VIP event, and that's where I got to meet you and Dave, and I got to meet Morella Sula, who is the owner of Global Women
Yeah.
Magazine. And I shared my story with her, and she published it on her site, and that's how this has all started. So it's just been a God thing. He's just kind
Yeah.
of moved, and then after that, I posted on my Facebook, and Nancy posted on hers. I've had hundreds and hundreds of comments thanking me for sharing my story. It's given other people hope. I've gotten lots of private messages from people who some shared their story for the first time. I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
Parents saying they're talking to their kids, and coaches, I got to talk to my athletes. And I got this incredible message from a woman in Australia who, she said, when she read my article, it crystallized her vision. She also has a story like mine, and wants me to join forces with her to be able to
Awesome.
be a part of something that God's really put on her heart. So it's amazing. I'm just excited. I've been praying, God, open the doors you want open and close the ones you want closed. And
Yeah.
so I'm just, my whole goal is to help people know they're not alone. Um, really, really trying to get people out of the shame, not just the
Right.
people who have dealt with sexual abuse, really anything, any type of trauma. Um, Society is really bad about shaming people and
Yeah.
telling them, trying to silence them. And I read a quote recently that was incredible. It said, 10 people who speak make more noise than 10,000 who remain silent.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I mean, it's so
Yeah.
true.
So, people are quick to kind of joke about speakers, motivational speakers, inspirational speakers, and something like I can get that. And it goes in cycles. Used to be a used car salesman, then it's a defense attorney. Now, motivational speakers and such are all kind of lumped in this category. But I think once you peel back the layers and you understand the drive of that person to do what they're doing, and not just the drive, but you understand the impact of what they're doing. For me, when I was, I crashed after my husband was killed. I crashed after the acquittal. And then every time I thought I couldn't crash again, I would crash again because of something in my mindset. And it wasn't until I started tuning into the other people's stories and learning from them. All right, here's somebody who's been through something, because it's easy to believe, right, that nobody can understand what it's like to feel what you're feeling. Nobody can understand to get to the point that you believe that nobody can understand what it's like to get to that point where you're literally sitting there moments away from ending your own life, or doing something. But then when you find other people who have, and they're strong enough to come out and tell their stories, you're like, oh my gosh, because all of a sudden it relieves you of feeling like you're this weakling, loser, horrible person, right? So the fact that you're coming out and doing this now in the arena that you're doing it in, and especially you're among the first, to come talk about, the athlete on athlete, I think is going to be huge and enormous. And I'm so glad that you're doing it and we get to be a little part, of sharing it. I want to go a couple other quick questions. I know this time is flying by.
I know.
So it's crazy. We're going to have you back for like 6 other episodes.
Yay.
So one part that I had read is that the athlete who raped you ultimately apologized to you.
Yes. That was pretty remarkable. That was in 1982 when that happened. And in 1983, I went to the Pan American Games and we were on the same team together. And of course, I'm just like, it's swirling around in my brain. Yeah. And at some point, we were alone together. And I just believe it was by God's design. I think God knew I could not handle any more at that point, and I needed a little bit of a relief. And I looked at him and I said, "You raped me." And I don't think he realized at that point, until that point, what he had done, because we were drinking. And I think because I froze and I stopped talking, I don't know, other than he looked at me horrified and he said, "I'm so sorry." And it was genuine. Yeah. It was genuine. Yeah. And, things happen. And that really, unfortunately, the damage was done, right? But I think God did use that to lighten it just a little bit. And, I know a lot of people think it's crazy. And I tell people in my story that just through God's help and grace, He's given me the ability to forgive all of these people. And I had to do that. I'm just speaking from my personal experience. I'm not telling anybody else what they need to do, but I heard one time that unforgiveness is a poison you drank thinking it's going to poison the other person. I really think in I know personal experience, unforgiveness was really killing me and tearing me up. And, I had to do that. I had to forgive in order to be able to move on. And I've gotten comments on Facebook, "Well, why haven't you named your accusers?" Well, all I can say is I prayed about it, and I think maybe it's out of God's protection. I don't have any evidence, right? This happened 30, 40 years ago. Who knows? I could get sued for defamation. I don't know. That my point is to give other people hope. I shared a lot of hard things in my story. I went through addiction. I had to go. I had 2 suicidal attempts. It was killing me. It was literally killing me. You. And it was when I finally went to rehab. I woke up after my second suicide attempt, and I woke up in the hospital, barely able to talk. And at that point, I got into rehab. I was in rehab for 72 days, and it was kind of slowly was how God, it was a real process. It took,
Yeah.
you know, God kind of gave me that old Olympic attitude again. It was like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to do everything I can, 90
Yeah.
meetings in 90 days after I got out of rehab and AA. And, it took a team of my family and AA and my sponsor and friends and now my now husband. I was married for 24 years, and unfortunately, that was a pretty tumultuous. Won't get into all those
Yeah.
details, but that also created a lot of mistrust and fear in my life because of things that happened in that marriage. God finally gave me the courage to get out of that and to finally be able to begin that road of healing that He had for me all along. And so it's been a journey. It's been hard,
Yeah.
but it's
I
but
bet.
it's but I'm on the other side, and I want to give people hope that with God you can do all things, and He's given me the strength to get through all this. And so, anyway, I'm
Yeah,
excited.
good. I'm not gonna walk you through everything, but
Right?
again, I think this is important, the whole suicide awareness.
Yes. Yes.
If I can ask you, say the second attempt that you made, you said you woke up in the hospital. Can you
Yes.
talk for a minute? Are you open to sharing quickly the last thing before I let you go?
Yeah.
How did you get to the hospital? I don't know, what were the circumstances, because there are people
Yeah.
in this situation who are listening that are maybe
Yes.
thinking about this like right today, so what was it from your attempt? I don't know what the attempt was, or but
Yeah.
how did that go from the attempt to
So
the hospital?
I was in manic depressive state.
Yeah.
And I was, once again, it's what's going on in our brain up
Yeah.
here. I was believing lies. I believe it's evil. I believe there's good and evil. I believe there's God, there's a devil, and I believe, that's what I believe personally. But I was believing lies that everybody would be better off without me because I was so depressed at that point. I was deep into alcoholism. And so one day I woke up, it was almost like I was like I was just like a puppet. I mean,
Mhm.
just was in that just absolute dark manic state of I can't do this anymore. I don't think anybody really, I did not, that wasn't me. I did
Right.
not want to commit suicide. I just didn't know how to
You
live.
wanted the
And
pain to stop. Yeah.
I just wanted the pain to stop. And I knew where I was going. I believed, I had faith, even a mustard seed. I have this little thing that I wear. There's a little mustard seed
Mm-hmm.
on here somewhere, and a lot of other things that are important to me. And I believe I had that mustard seed size faith that can move mountains. But I knew where I just wanted to go home. What I just wanted to go home to heaven. That's, it was just, I was so messed up in my thinking, and that's obviously was not God's intention.
Right.
So I was drinking from a very early that day. And then I just started taking prescription medicine, and I got into, it was like 10 at night. My then husband was gone. We were not doing well at all. He wasn't out of the house, but he was gone on a trip. I had two kids asleep upstairs, and I got into my car and I just
Wow.
turned the car on. I was doing everything I could do. And then all of a sudden, I heard a voice say, "You don't want to die." And I believe it was God. "You don't want to die. You don't want to die." And all of a sudden, it became my voice. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And I looked down in my haze, and I have my phone, and my neighbor across the street's number is right there. I mean, it was a miracle. Like,
Oh,
I don't even know
wow.
when I called her last. All I did was push the number, and they were these ranchers that always went to bed early and
Mm-hmm.
up early to rise, and she just happened, of course this is not a coincidence, right,
Right.
up at midnight shelling peanuts at her
Wow.
window that faced the
Oh my
garage
goodness.
door.
Wow.
And she hears me saying, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And it was Barbara that literally saved my life and
Wow.
came over and called it. And that the last thing I remember was Barbara saying, "Kim, Kim." And I woke up the next day. And so, to anybody out there who is suicidal, I understand what they're going through. It's a very, very dark state. A lot of people think it's selfish. Um, I don't agree with that. People don't understand unless you've been there. It's a very, very dark, very, for me, I was incredibly manic and depressed and believing lies. And so I don't think most really, if they really, true self really would want to die, right? It's believing
Yeah.
the lies. So
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
thank you for
yeah.
sharing that. I'm sorry to take you back, but I'm glad you did
No,
because
that's
I
all right.
think you've touched on so many things that are going to reach so many people. And I hope you just
Yeah.
continue telling your story. I think your story is so multi-layered. You could just really
Yeah.
peel it apart and peel it apart and do that. And so thank you for having the strength
Yeah.
to do that. And I mean, and so awesome the success you've achieved. And now you're heading into a whole new path that I
Yeah. I'm
think is going
excited.
to be equally impressive, if not even more so, because of how hard earned it was and what you've done. So thank you for trusting us to share your
Yeah.
story and for introducing it to our community. We will absolutely be reaching back out to you to be
That'd be great.
another part of it again. If somebody wants to connect with you and share their story or
Sure.
whatever, you're open to that.
Absolutely. You can find me on Facebook at Kimberly Rhodenbaugh or Kim Rhodenbaugh Lewallen. You can private message me on there. That's probably the best
Yeah.
way. Um, yeah,
Okay.
that'd be great. I'm praying about what God wants me to do
Yeah,
next. I
where it's
think
going to take you.
I feel like I'm probably going to start a nonprofit. I'm still kind of praying into that. And I really want to work with, especially the United States Swimming to
Yeah.
hopefully change the culture, especially of some of these United States teams and just kind of how these young girls and older now there's some like 30 something year old men that are on these
Right.
not and they're the sport of swimming and all sports are filled with amazing people, but there's some bad
Just
apples in
like
the bunch.
anything. Yeah. The
Anything.
majority of
Yeah.
people are good, hardworking,
Yeah.
honorable, and I feel that they need to be protected from the very few minority that are not. And that's,
Yes.
for
And
anything. Yeah. Yeah.
sharing stories. I just talked to my niece recently, who's a swimmer on the biggest YMCA in all of the United States, and she said they actually put safe sport into their swim team. But hearing my story, she said, it's a lot more powerful to these kids to hear stories
Yes, it is.
than
And that's how
than
people connect. Yep.
yeah, and
And
that's what
facts
you're
and
doing.
statistics. Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You're sharing people's stories of hope, and I think that people connect with that. So that's what I'm hoping to do is to share my story with kids and with people to give them hope. So
Awesome. Thank
yeah,
you so very much.
yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.